a colleague of mine, a dear friend. He's the one whose wedding was the first one, I should say, let me rephrase it. He and his wife got married. It was the first wedding that I'd ever conducted. He's now a rabbi. In those days, he was in the film business, an editor. And he told me a story, and it was about a pastor in Arkansas, Reverend Bowen. And Reverend Bowen had a shower. That's usually where inspiration comes, either a song or an idea. And in that shower, he thought about how he could palpably make a difference in the world. And he said, what if I could reduce the amount of air pollution? Not coming out of vehicles, but coming out of people. He said, what about if we could work for a complaint-free world? Wouldn't that be amazing? No more kvetching. Now, I don't know that in his shower the word kvetch came up. But in my shower, kvetch would come to mind because that's our word for complaining. And complaining has a nice sound to it, but it doesn't have the kvetch of a kvetch. So what he decided was to make 250 bracelets. These, like Lance Armstrong made famous, these rubber bracelets. His were purple. And he said, let's hand them out to the people, the parishioners in our church. And what we'll ask them to do is to see if they can go without complaining. And these bands will be little reminders. So he made 250 of them. And he handed them out with a sermon that I'm about to give, my version of his idea. Credit to him for thinking of it and coming up with these little frontlets between our eyes, as we say in the Wehrhafte, little spiritual post-it notes. And what he said was, it takes 21 days to create a new habit. Let's see if we as a community can get rid of complaints for 21 days. So I'm saying, can we as a community, nearly 2,000 people, reduce complaining by that many people? Can we do it? Imagine a marriage without complaints. Imagine a relationship with your kids that doesn't allow for the air pollution, that noise of complaining. Imagine a get-together with your chavurah. Imagine a visit to the DMV that doesn't allow for complaints. Imagine waiting in line and realizing the line is long and you have places to be, but resisting the urge to do what you might have done before that little blue band reminded you to think differently and to act differently. And you don't complain. Is it okay then? Because the question you might ask is, what do I do with my need to see change happen? Because ultimately, hasn't the world been bettered by complaints? Didn't Martin Luther King have a complaint? Yes. But he didn't express it as a complaint. He said, I have a dream that things could be different. He didn't say, look how awful they are, not once in his speech. He didn't complain. His words were positive, and that's why we remember them. We remember them these years after his life and death because they inspired, they lifted, they alighted. And what we can do is say words that add inspiration and beauty to our air, to our world. I think all of us should be vigilant environmentalists when it comes to what we add to the pollution of our world. Now, it could be in our hands, it could be on the ground, in our rivers, but what I want to focus on is what I'll call spiritual environmentalism. What we can do with ourselves, our words, how we can add beauty rather than adding degradation to the land, to the people. Think about life with negative people. Think about one instance recently and how you reacted to somebody who was negative, how it changed the mood of a room, changed the color, the lyrics, the melody of an encounter. Every single one of us has gripes. I know that every chair that has a number on it says you have a right to gripes, including mine. But at the same time, the question is, if we came here to do something, not just to hear words and hear music and be inspired by what other people are doing, then the question is, can we say, this call is to me? Can I make the difference? Can I go 21 days without complaining? So I ordered from China little blue bands. Now, as you get to the back, as you exit the sanctuary, they'll be on both sides. Blue bands, they say Valley Outreach Synagogue. And they are your little Totafot. Remember in Ve'ahavta it says, Ve'hayu letotafot beinenecha. What does it mean? They shall be for frontlets between thy eyes. I don't know what a frontlet is. I think what it's saying is they shall be reminders. They should be the post-it note on the fridge that says stop and do differently. And so what we do with these bands is we begin on one hand. Every one of us take a band. It'll stretch. I suggest you don't complain about its size. If someone's in line ahead of you and they take the one you wanted, resist. And I'm not saying resort to violence instead of complaints. That's not the solution. Take that moment and ask yourself, wait a second, how can I do this differently? How can I be different? How can I make a practical difference in my life and in the lives of others this year? In this moment. How, as I leave here, I guarantee there will be a reason for complaint. It's a nail sticking out in a chair. It's going out. It's the heat of the day in whatever valley we're in here. I've lost myself in the sanctuary. It's going home to bills that have come in that hopefully on this day we ignore. It's realizing that it hurts to get out of our chair. And all of those yesterday were reasons to complain, but today, the reasons to observe without complaint. So the rabbis say, what do we do with the thought of complaint? Because all of us have an inclination, and the rabbis teach us what we do is what the Hasidim teach us, what the Baal Shem Tov taught us, which was sweeten the bitter. Take a sip of that soup and taste it differently. Look with a different perspective at that moment, that reality, at that relationship, at that situation in your story. What did the Baal Shem Tov say that I mentioned last night in that sermon? He said, love it more. In other words, he said, root yourself in gratitude. That will be the cure to complaining. Because ultimately, the flip side of complaint is gratitude. So the question then is there a difference between complaint and dissatisfaction? And I think there is. I think the world is bettered by dissatisfaction. I think we have this conundrum. All of us need to hold in one hand our deep gratitude and satisfaction with all that is in our lives, for we say, on this day, God, you created the world. That's what I get to live in. But in that other hand, have a modicum of dissatisfaction, because you look out and you see a need to make things better. But what's complaint in relation to satisfaction? I think complaint is the kvetchy, loud uncle of dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is what propels us to do good. Complaint is what pulls others down in our relationships. It's what sullies the air. It's what tarnishes experiences. One of the things that Reverend Bowen had on his website, because I looked him up, wanted to see what he said. What do these bracelets say? He had a section devoted to churches and synagogues. Imagine. He writes, churches and other religious organizations are notorious hotbeds of complaining. Why? His words are, because people feel that they have a strong emotional stake in their religious home. They tend to be strident in their opinions. And because churches, synagogues, and other religious organizations are considered to be open and welcoming, people may feel that they have a right to complain without condemnation. The negativity created by rampant complaining diminishes the great spiritual work, he writes, done by synagogues and churches alike. It diminishes the leader's ability to guide the congregants in a unified direction, and it drains the organization of energy. There's a correlation between complaining and well-being. Doctors will tell you the people who complain the most feel the most pain, take the most medicine, have a more fully realized experience of their pain. Because every time our inner ear and our outer ear hear the same message, that life is somehow bad, that we need to dwell on the negative, we ultimately hear that message strongly, loudly, clearly. That was our source of wisdom, even if it came out of our own mouths. Guys who get together and complain about their wives ultimately go home and reinforce that message that they wanted to see of their wives. Friends who complain and gossip negatively about each other ultimately look for those traits in their friends. Husbands and wives, children. Imagine today going out of this place and resisting complaint. So the rabbis say, but what do we do with the urge to complain? What do I do with my frustration because that waitress brought me hot soup that wasn't hot? It's a Jewish complaint. They say the first thing is think about lyric and melody. There is a way to positively get the hot soup, but it's a way that doesn't center on your ego or diminishing theirs. It's simply sticking to the facts. It's finding a kind way to say that the soup needs to be warmed up and realizing that person responds, because ultimately people are in response to one another. We create music together whenever we allow somebody a refrain to add to their refrain. It's lyrics and melody. That's most of our lives. It's lyrics and melodies. All of us are the composers of stories and conversations. All of us are either making beautiful music or making cacophony of sound that ultimately dulls our world, tarnishes the beauty that God gave us. So every day we wake up, instead of feeling what's wrong, we look to what's right. We open our eyes to the beauty of a world given to us. On this day, we say, Harat Olam. God created the world, and for that, I have only gratitude. And as I come to the next stage in life and I have an inclination to complain, the rabbis say, don't worry about the inclination. The rabbis say that our thoughts are the playground of the soul. We're allowed dreams and thoughts, however, whatever direction they take, negative or positive. The rabbis say we can have even violence in our dreams and not be violent people. Because ultimately we understand that our tradition teaches us that actions are what define us to God and one another. Actions are what are making this world more or less beautiful. You only need to turn the news on or read a newspaper to see how true that is. We don't read about people's inclinations toward good or evil. We see photographs of their actions of either, mostly evil. So we have an inclination. And then we have a reminder, this little band that maybe after a few meals is starting to squeeze a little more on our wrist. So we stretch it more. And what Reverend Bowen said was, at that moment when you hear yourself complaining, switch the band from one hand to the other. That act will be a reminder that that was the moment when you complained. And then if it happens again, switch it back to this hand. But what he says that's vital is this is yours. It's not your husband's, it's not your wife's. Nobody has a right to say that was a complaint. It's your story. Every one of you is going to get your own bracelet. It's your story. When you're driving and you complain about something on the telephone, maybe not while you're driving, find that moment to be honest with yourself and to move your bracelet. At home, at work, think about a workplace where you create the positive infection of a good idea. Reverend Bowen created 250 of his bracelets. There are now more than 5.5 million in circulation in 110 countries because it was a good idea. And good ideas are like great viruses. They spread just as quickly as bad ones. So we have the opportunity and the imperative to create good ideas today. To be in this sanctuary, to say, I want to go out because this not only is for me, it's meant to start a conversation. Somebody will say, what's that bracelet? And you'll say, oh, let me tell you. Another thing I want to ask is that you email me. I know Brenda will hate me for saying this because she's going to see 11 or 1,500 emails. Just put them on my desk. I'm sorry. We'll see if we can not complain to each other. But my only complaint would be if you don't send them in. Send in on day 5 your experience. What was it like? Did you beat yourself up when you moved it twice, 3 times in an hour? Was it gratifying by day 7 to realize one full week you managed without complaining? What did it feel like to realize something new about yourself? Because that's what you do. You create a new image of yourself in the new year. We say that we wear white because we have a new and pure beginning. So wouldn't not complaining in these first 21 days of the year be an extraordinary way to look at that clean sheet? Wouldn't it be amazing to come back here in Yom Kippur, and I can read, if you've sent them to me, in these days of awe, some of your experiences of what it was like to wear the band and to realize the good. What was the conversation that came out of it with somebody who said, oh, I could never do that? And you could say, well, I've done it for 4 days. Will any of us get to day 21 without complaining? I think we will. I absolutely think we will. Reverend Bowen made his personal goal to be an exemplar to his community and himself, his family, to not complain for 21 days, and he did it. So I take it upon myself, and I think my wife is listening. She is. So let me ask you a question, and I want to put it to you. I want to hear somebody's response. If the experience of dissatisfaction begins with, hey, I hate when you, give me a better way that isn't a complaint to express that same dissatisfaction. Go ahead, Ruthie. I feel bad when. It hurts me when. It upsets me when. What about this one? Go ahead. I prefer when you. That's not a complaint, but it gets the same thing done. But the difference is, you know, that way honors another person. If we look at every single human being as having the divine in them, then how dare we diminish them? We have the right only to honor them, to honor the beauty in them. Let me ask you another question. You go and you find something wrong because as you're going to Zuma Station 5, that was a plug for this afternoon, at 4 o'clock, there's an accident on Canaan Road, God forbid, because that means someone's ailing. But let's say your inclination is to beat on the dashboard and say, I won't say. Give me another response to that that might be beautiful. Yes, okay, you again. Say again, Bailey. May God bless that person. May they be okay. Absolutely. It shifts your mind from what's lacking in you, getting somewhere on time, to what you see in them, which is they need my prayers at this moment. Yes. Hi. How are you? Stella, let me ask you. What's a reason to complain in a time when we couldn't complain? Give me an example of a complaint that you might have. You go to the fridge and you open with one door or two and what you want isn't there. What's a better way to handle that moment? Everybody has an answer. I want to hear Stella. Any idea? Jacob, Melissa? Somebody shout out your thought. What's another experience of that? Mom didn't fill the fridge. What was it? Others are starving. What's another? I really didn't need that third. Yes, and? Say again, Bob. I didn't hear. I'll go and get it by myself. So imagine how this could change your world. What was this? Think of all the calories I saved because that cake wasn't there anymore. Thank you, sister. So when you leave here, there will be a crowd of people wanting junior bracelets and adult bracelets. If you get the wrong one, that's your first experience. If you get an adult one, but it feels like a junior one, then maybe you should think about not going back to the fridge. Remember that as you put these on your wrist, they won't fit. They won't fit. I couldn't get it on my wrist immediately because it has to be stretched, so don't panic. Just do this and it'll fit. And if you complain often, it'll become very loose because it'll go back and forth, back and forth. Next week at Yom Kippur, if one of you comes in and it looks more like a bangle than a bracelet, we'll know a lot about how you spent your week. Stella, you wanted to give us an answer to conclude this sermon on this Rosh Hashanah morning. What is it? What is it? The question was, what are you going to do the next time you feel like you want to complain, but want to find a better way to handle it? What's a better way than complaining? Give me an answer. What's the first answer that comes to mind? Something isn't the way you wanted it. Find a solution. That's the best answer I've ever heard. Instead of asking mom to find the solution, find the solution. Instead of looking to other people to fix the world, fix the world. Shana Tova. May it be a year without complaints. 21 days. Let's go for 21 days without complaints. What I want to ask is a practical request. All of our new members, it's 1 o'clock on the dot. How that happened, I have no idea. As we go out, first of all, our thanks to Shepherd of the Hills for hosting us, to the wonderful people at the back who are helping us with light and sound and slides. New members, please exit first so you can get your gift. Everybody take the sticker off the back of your seat. Throw them in the trash cans. Thank you to everybody. Shana Tova. May it be a year of life and blessing. We have a truck that needs to be fed. If you don't have food in your vehicle to put in the Sova truck, make the effort. Go across the road to Ralph's. Buy one bag for the poor. Bring one bag back. We'll help you load it into the truck. You'll do a great mitzvah. Thanks to everybody.